All right, this is about Black Europe, known from the book True Myth, Black Vikings of the Middle Ages. Chapter 7. By most accounts, Denmark was inhabited by a royal race of Norsemen, whose legendary kings were the Strugalings, or the Stridelings, and Beowulf. This royal race descended from the Strala, who, in the Unigon saga, is the son of Odin. Whether Dan, supposedly a legendary king from whom Denmark was named, was accepted by all Danes during his reign is uncertain. As it is specifically he supposedly lived, we may assume that sometimes before 500 AD. As discussed in previous chapters, Jutland probably acquired his name Denmark because of the occupation of Dianan, or Diana, who anciently occupied it after it was expelled from the British Isles. Essentially of Egyptian origin, they came in contact with descendants of the earlier Africoids and Egyptians whose ancestors had long exceeded the mega monolith tombs and other structures throughout Western Europe as Africoid Picts, Teutons, and Samurai people who overspread much of Germany and the British Isles. Arriving in Jutland with an advanced culture, their fleets, and significant number of people would have not been difficult for the Diana to become the dominant force there, powerful enough to become the ruling elite. Over the centuries, L.A. Watto dates that their arrival in Jutland to the 10th century BC. They were enemies with the people residing in Scandinavia, as well as the later arriving dark-skinned Scythian people coming from Asia. And if Watto date for arrival is correct, the challenging the expanding Roman Empire in Pannonia as the late in the 2nd century BC as the Samurai, describing earlier. Over the centuries, numerous people emerged in Scandinavia: the Tunstons, the Umbros, and the Gate, and the more who were likely the Goths, who were first noticed in Sweden, and northern Germany. However, by the 7th century, the Danes, or the Dani, also known as the Cimbri, became important as a royal race who dominated not only Denmark, but southern Norway and Sweden as well. It should be understood that other races were present in Scandinavia, like the previously mentioned Lapps, who overspread the northerly regions of Scandinavia and the Stones of the central and northern Sweden, a Finnic people by most accounts related to the Friends across the Baltic in Finland, a dark shortish people who may have connection to the Inuit or the Eskimos, who Western anthropologists class as the Uruk or Mongoloid. Other scientists connect the early Finns to the Africoids, and not without reason. This connection will be looked into further on. The Finns were a seafaring people, some who may already have been continued of the Viking raiders, although there is not a lot of information as whether they had shipbuilding capabilities. However, sometimes intermingle with the Norsemen and is mentioned in the Norse sagas as practitioners of magic. Sometimes around the 700 AD, Vikings invaded the Shetland Islands and within a decade established a stronghold on Orkneys, building fortifications and securing the best ports and setting up farming communities which they did not pretend much success. These Vikings are said to have been Norwegians, but they did not come to the islands in large numbers until the end of the 8th century when the land was more suitable for farming. Their takeover of these islands seemed to be had to set up a further base of raids to the south, Scotland, and eventually Ireland. Although many equate the Norse with Norwegian, Norse is typically applied to the language and the people inhabiting Scandinavia during the first half of the Middle Ages. Implicit in the term Norse is North, and in the Northern, Northmen, by which these Scandinavian raiders were regarded by the people of the British Isles. They were racially similar, spoke the same language, and had similar customs, physiognomy, and religious belief. Considered pagan, which must have involved from a blending of Egyptian and Asiatic belief systems. They are also the same predilection for raids and rapine. The Danes are often cited as particularly barbarous, and the ancient chronicles call them black, as the historical work of the period attests. The Shetland, notably the islands of Feta and Uns, were anciently occupied by people similar to the Finns, who were aboriginals inhabiting northern Scandinavia, and the territory stretched eastward into northern Asia. These Finns were short, dark-complected people who spread to the Arctic regions from Europe into Eastern Asia. Such people occupying the Shetland Islands were when the Norse arrived, and most have been killed or taken into slavery. Most historians after that the Norse raiders were Norwegian. The Norse called the original people of the northern Scandinavia Finns, but we need to understand in more ancient times, Finns were not confined to the country we know today as Finland. According to Fairleigh Morat, the author of The Fears, such people continued to inhabit islands of Uras and Afotar after the Norse invasion of the Shetland. He informs us the Shetlanders used the name Finns as small-statured, dark-skinned strangers, i.e. the Norsemen, that their ancestors had given to people who preceded the Norse in the Shetlands. In Chapter 5, it is noted that the affinity between the Finns and the North African skull types, and there is giving testimony of a close and clear affiliation between the idioms of the Black Hungarians and the Old Finnish race, which modern linguistics confirm, classifying the Finnish and the Hungarian language as Euro-Finnic Uric. 15 in the 16th century, 1600 years ago, when black horns were stored in Europe, the racial connection between these two, i.e. the Finns and the Hungarians, would have been obvious. They looked alike, and perhaps were the same people, branching among them, moving north and northwest to the Baltic and Scandinavia, and others moving southwest and into Eastern Europe and the original Central Asian homeland. The question for us is, how long have they been migrating into Northern Europe, and were the Finns in the Scandinavia and the Shetlands a result of early migration to Northern Europe, or a branch of the Hunter surge continued into the continent in the 4th and 5th centuries? In any event, the 7th century Shetlanders are called dark-skinned, short Norse invaders Finland, who actually began raiding the islands, and those are the Orkneys around 681 AD. Morat reference to these Norsemen is the earliest mention of the Norwegian Vikings I have so far come across, and their short stature signified they were predominantly of Asiatic-type people. The Finnic cranial entity within ancient North Africans bespeak of an older connection that is connected to the continent back to remote migration of Africans, or a type of African out of the mother continent to the part of Asia where the so-called Mongolian people would emerge. The Orkneys were a low-lying and more fertile than the Shetlands, occupied by people known as the Piti or the Pepe. Morat cites a Norwegian historian who states that the Piti was scarcely taller than the Pygmies, and the Pygmy spearmen were repulsed by raiding Norsemen who destroyed them, securing the island for themselves. If the Piti were pygmy-like in height, and then a small stature and dark-skinned Norwegian strangers, shorter stature themselves, must have been primarily Finns who at this time made up the greater population of Norway. According to Mayotte, Vikings were raiding Scotland by 681, but there were reports in their efforts to subdue it. The Black Picts and the Scots remained dominant in Alba, as ancient Scotland was known, and we know that there were fierce fighters themselves, having reports of Romans' attempts to subdue all of Alban, the largest British island. Early in the 8th century, Oghaz Mac of Fergus came to power in Alban, CI 729 AD, and tried to organize the country to resist Vikings' intrusion. Rosalind Merson, the author of the History of Scotland, has Scotland MacFurnace, whom she called the Pictish King Onus probably the name Angus, ruling the Scots from 741 and enjoying a long reign. It is doubtful MacFurgus ruled as long as mentions seem to indicate, for Morat mentions Irish annals stating that a fleet of 150 Pict vessels were lost at the Cape of Wrath off the northwest coast of Scotland in 721 AD, and the Pictish naval power waned after this date. He notes Archibald Lewis stating that we hear nothing more of the Pictish fleets which have been active on the coast of Scotland and about the Arning. Now it was mariners from western Norway who began probing the south and doing so with little opposition. Murray states the Mithrax reign lasted until 761, and before the end of the 8th century, Vikings were rampaging almost unchallenged through the west. Just prior to this, Mithrax, the Pictish king, was desperately engaged in land battles with the Scots in the west and the Britons in the south, being finally defeated by the Scotties in 750. In 756, the Picts were militarily crushed by the northern barons, losing possession of their Hebridean island territories, and within a decade, most of Pictland, i.e. Alba or Scotland. The Scots originated from Ireland and subdued most of Alba, giving their name to it. And the reader is reminded that all the peoples being spoken for were primarily black skinned, Picts, Scotty, and Britons. The term Britain is usually applied to the Welsh in the southwest. There was a British occupying central and northern England, and the Welsh may have been allied, if not related to some of them. The people more anciently known as the Celts or the Black Celts, who occupied most of Al-Amin when the Romans invaded. The Picts and the Scots were intermarried over an ensuing century until Pict land, over which the Picts maintained dominant control, was completely conquered by Kenneth MacDublin, also known as the King of Scots, in 843. By this time, Vikings had been raiding areas of Britain for half a century. The first raid recorded of what would become England took place in 793 when the Danish Vikings attacked Lindisfarne, looting and destroying a church there called God's Church. It is early mentioned in the Irish Chronicles made it between white Norwegian invaders and black Danish Vikings, while the Welsh, whose territory was partly occupied by the Romans and itself presumably by white-skinned Saxons, which lightened their population, called both groups of these invaders black. Still, some Irish accounts, as noted earlier by Rosalind McMitchin, refers to the Norwegian invaders as black Gentiles. Ionia was burned and devastated, and again on 806, when amongst the Viking raiders. Ionia was a great religious city connected, according to Higgins, Greece, and Ionians, originally black-skinned, who migrated to the island many centuries before. At the time of the Viking invasion, it was ruled by Scots, a territory of Scottish Diarrhea. But the Norse, whether Norwegian or Danish, didn't have anything to do with Christianity. Although most historians have followed the Irish Chronicles, for example, dividing Norwegians and Vikings into white and black, respectively, the historians do not comment on race of these people, rarely describe them as black skin, including Swedish Vikings, who had less to do with raids in Britain and France, and concentrating their raids on the areas around the Baltic and Russia. The 7th century historian Jordanes, while remarking on how notable the Swedes were for being tall and other men, states, as cited by Gwyn Jones, that the Danes were the same race as the Swedes. My emphasis, Vikings. If Norwegian and Danes were black-skinned, as Welsh historians and some chronicles insist, according to Mission, and if the Danes were the same race as the Swedes, as the Georgians Alvarez, and then the Norsemen of the North Ages were predominantly dark-skinned peoples inhabiting and dominating Scandinavia in relatively recent historical times, with the Danes invariably called black-skinned, not just dark, but those discussed by the regular Viking peoples. There's a strong suggestion that the term Dane itself implies black, or means black men speaking the Danish tongue, at the very least. The reader has already seen quite enough evidence that black-skinned people occupied the Jutland Peninsula in areas during prehistoric times. There is nothing to indicate there's any altercation in this fact in ensuing centuries, since the Danes are called black Gentiles, black strangers, or dubbed Gael, black foreigners, throughout the British Isles during the whole Viking Age, i.e. 800 to 1100 AD. And David McRitchie punctuates the fact when he states, there can be no question about it. The destination given for the common people of the race or another is verily founded upon the same physical features, and most of the natural distinction is the color of the race differ in complexion. Therefore, when white races of Britain styled Danes black heathen, they simply use most of the natural term that would occur to them. Regarding the Norseman being called black heathen, MacRitchie makes a point of noting it's not only in Scotland that the Danes received this name, but throughout the whole British Isles. In the pre-Columbian discovery of America, B.F.D. Casa, commenting briefly on the colonization of Iceland in 860 AD, and states the discovery of Iceland has been known by the Norseman by a Dane of Swedish descent named Gardan. Since we know Danes of this period were black, the Casa comments infers that Swedes were the same, as mentioned of Jordanes above, and perhaps the term Dane implied black. The first reference to Denmark was in 908 AD, more than a century after the Norse invasion of the British Isles began, indicating as well that Dan or Dane was originally applied to the people and later attached to the country from which they derived. The Danes were clearly dispensable because of their complexion, and since the name Denmark was not in vogue in 860, when Iceland was being discovered by a Dane of Swedish descent, it's paramount to say it was discovered by a black man from Sweden. The Casa does not mention the complexion of this Norwegian, but does state they were Northmen and when descended of the race in the early times migrated from Asia and settled down in Denmark. However, the Casa does not equate the Danes with the typical European we're familiar with today. While Irish chronicles, and for whatever reason refer to the Norwegian as Fingal, supposed white foreigners, evidence have been presented with the early Norwegians who invaded Shetland and Orkney Islands in the open 8th century were short in stature and dark skinned. In fact, there is no reason to believe that would have been an alternate a century later when Danish people began foraying in Ireland. Although possibly intermingling with Danes and Swedes could produce a taller people over 3-4 generations. Gwen Jones informed us, the leading families of Scandinavia were much intermarried for sound business reasons. There was 11 of Danes in Norway, Sweden, Norwegians in Sweden and Denmark, and Swedes in Denmark and Norway, ruling, serving, fighting, mating, marrying, and seeking to lose the world's good. The 9th century was a significant increase in Viking activity among looting and burning and massacres of the monks of Ionia. The revelation of dark-skinned people occupying Scandinavia in fairly recent historical time must be shocking to many readers. However, this information presented primarily by white or European historians have been existed for quite some time. David McRitchie's monumental Ancient and Modern Britons was possibly profound work and published in 1884 and was pretty much unavailable until 1985 when it was republished. Nearly half of the first volumes is devoted to black and dark-skinned occupants in Europe, especially black Vikings, showing that this information has been around for quite some time, was simply ignored throughout most of the 20th century, while less than an honest image of the Vikings in Europe was promoted by Western historians, Western meaning white. At the time, the Vikings' raid were intensifying in the British Isles and in general turmoil, the rest of Western Europe. Among the Frankish and Germanic states, there was much infighting. During the early 9th century, Charlemagne conquered the Germanic Saxons and made an alliance with the Slavonic communities in an attempt to control all trade from the Baltic to the west of the continent, an area long been in the realm of Denmark, which enjoyed prosperity for more than 2,000 years by virtue of the positions of the two European trading routes. To curtail the growth of the Frankish kingdom, Danes constructed the Demvire, a semblance of earthwork in the south of Jutland Peninsulas, and erected a defensive area against such attack from the south, built over a period of centuries, from 810 to 1160 AD. Charlemagne sent his son Charles on an expedition to attack the Danes, but Charles thought better, diverting his troops towards the Baltic in a lesser adventure. Charlemagne never directly challenged the Danes. Jones stating this in regards, it was clear that Charlemagne had no thoughts of conquering the Danes. There was more of intrigue to these events that took place in 810, but essentially from our main discourse. After Charlemagne's death in 814, conflict ensued in the territory which had unified through the kingship, and the resurgence of Christianity had spread widely in the Frankish kingdoms. There were several attempts to introduce this new and unwanted religion to the Danes, which fiercely resisted. The Norsemen were called heathen, pagan, and lived among a strange dictation of the gods, Thor, Fredra, Woodra, Odin, and Frigga, whom they called upon, preparing each raid on larger adventures of conquest. The Norse kings and warriors often dream of contemplating some adventure and dreams wanting such treachery or promise them success. There is no evidence of any other religious book that abided by it, and it's unclear whether their marriages, which seems easy to effect, involved any religious rites, though they probably did. Even as a doubt for all Northernmen, whether Danes, Swedes, or Norwegian, were converts with all aspects of their religion, which was unknown to us. What is known is the Norsemen abhorred Christianity, and that Christian churches frequently looted for their treasures were burned to the ground when the Vikings led the town on attack. All right, I'm going to stop right there. You know what I'm saying? That's a good 5 chapters in, or chapter 7, 5 pages in, chapter 7. But there was a lot of black. He gave a lot of books, a lot of sites. I'm a type of man here. And, Europe was black. You can also look up Himmelko. You can also look at Himmelko from the Carinthian admiral, whose mission was to go to the North Sea. So black people have been visiting these areas for a long, long time. Yes, these areas were black Europe. Hey, you know what I'm saying? Forum study groups, so you can get this stuff on out there, the information. It's just more than one book that says this, Forum them study groups, you can get this knowledge out there and spit it, This is our history. So they can't even claim Europe. Basically what it's saying, you know what I'm saying? But we're going to have a lot more studies on this, and also about the black dwarves. and what was their part in this, Hey, subscribe to the channel. Much love to y'all. Much love to you and yours. Hey, we keep on making big things here at the channel. And keep on doing it. Subscribe, one love.